And Sparky said, my dad gave me two words. He said, son, if you live by these two words, you'll never go wrong. And he said, those two words have been the guiding words for my entire life. And the words were, be kind.
That's a voice that's well known to generations of Detroiters, Mort Crim. He has a book out, Anchored, A Journalist's Search for Truth, and he's my guest today. I'm Jer Stays, and welcome to your Daily Detroit for Tuesday, November 16th, 2021. After our feature conversation with Mort, I'll send you out the door with a couple of quick things to know around town. So let's just jump right into it. Joining me is Mort Crim. Among the many hats he's successfully worn through his life, you might know him as the longtime anchor and trusted voice for WDIV TV4 News. His online home nowadays is mortcrimspeaks.com. He has a new book out, Anchored, A Journalist's Search for Truth. Mort, first, it's an honor and a pleasure. Welcome to Daily Detroit.
Thank you, Jer. Appreciate it.
So when you say search for the truth, after reading the book, it is about so much more than the news. You reveal the curtain on not just the good times, but the challenges and how you worked through them. You kept pushing forward. Why did you decide to write about your personal search for the truth as well?
Well, the genesis of the book goes back to my selection by Will Ferrell as the prototype for Ron Burgundy in the movies, the Anchorman movies. And of course, that was a parody and a spoof, and we all had a lot of fun with it. I met Will at the premiere of Anchorman 2, and he said, I want to thank you for the good humor you've shown in the interviews that you've done. And I said, well, Will, if you had billed this movie as a documentary, I'd really be pissed. But I said, as a parody, as a fun take on the profession, I said, I think all of us need to be able to laugh at ourselves. And there's certainly enough humor in every profession, whether you're a lawyer, a doctor, a teacher, or a newsman. There's enough humor in what we do that we should be able to laugh at ourselves. So that was the genesis for the book. A lot of my friends said, you've gotten so much publicity about this connection to Anchorman that you ought to write the story of what it was like to really be an anchorman and tell the serious side. Of course, there's also a lot of humor in my book. But that was the beginning of it, and I spent about 3 years chronicling my career, both at the network and at the local level. I've had some very interesting experiences covering the space program, covering Lyndon Johnson and several presidential summits. And that all made, I thought, for an interesting story. But when I sent the manuscript to my agent, Susanna Einstein in New York, she called me back a week later and she said, I really like this book. It's interesting. But she said, I'm Jewish. And I said, yes, I know you're Jewish. She said, well, I never thought I'd be saying this to anybody, but I'm going to say it to you. Your book needs more Jesus. And I said, Susanna, I know what you're saying. You're saying that my struggle coming from a very conservative evangelical background to where I am today, philosophically and theologically, you're telling me that you want to hear and read more of the personal struggle, not just the story of my career and the interesting things I've done as a journalist. She said, spot on. That's what you need to do. That's the story. That's your story. And that's what people are going to be interested in. That's what they need to hear. So I went back and spent another 2 years, altogether 5 years, writing the book and refocusing it and allowing more of the personal Mort Crim and the struggle to find truth in the big picture, not just finding facts as journalists find them, but looking for answers to the big questions. Why am I here? Who am I really? Is there a God? Can we really know truth in any objective or meaningful sense? And once I was willing to let that come out and come through and be a part of my book, in fact, to be I would say the dominant theme or subtext of the book, it was an altogether different book, and it was very satisfying to have done that.
Yeah, and it has stories that, whether you were in the business or not, you can relate to the journey and the walk. And I appreciate that. There are a number of moments while I was reading it over the weekend, and I went, oh, wow, like these are all these things that you see, the coiffed hair and the makeup and all that other stuff. But there really was like a whole world of things happening behind the scenes, just a few feet behind that camera.
Oh yes, and I wouldn't call this a tell-all book. I'm very kind to the people I worked with, and even where there was friction and tension, as happened with Bill Curtis and me in Chicago, because frankly, uh, I make the analogy to an NFL team bringing in two first-string quarterbacks, and one of them has to be the secondary guy, and that's what happened at CBS in Chicago. I was brought in to replace Bill Curtis, and then he didn't leave. So even in that situation, I don't really take shots at anybody. It was just an unfortunate situation. Sparky Anderson, was the manager of the Detroit Tigers during the same time that I was there. I got to know Sparky very well. He became a friend, and I remember hearing him in a speech one time. They were paying tribute to him at some breakfast, and Sparky said, "My dad gave me two words. He said, 'Son, if you live by these two words, you'll never go wrong.'" And he said, those two words have been the guiding words for my entire life. And the words were, be kind. And I've tried all my life I had parents who also taught me the value of kindness and consideration and being courteous to other people. So I tried to let that spirit also guide me in writing my book. So while there's a lot of revelation and a lot of things that you wouldn't know about me or about the business or about some of the people in the business, this is not in any way a vicious book. I'm sure you know that from having read it. I've tried to, in all of my dealings in life, to be kind.
Honestly, that's something that I appreciated about it, because there were actual lessons to be taken from so many of the vignettes, and we don't need to get into all of them, but so many of them, there were lessons from it, and it reminded me of some of the teachings of my parents where, it was kind of like you realize that in any career, you're kind of working in a deck of cards, and you never know when they're going to be reshuffled, and you're going to be next to a card that was originally in somebody else's hand.
Sure.
And so treating people well is important in all of that.
I don't think there's any downside to being kind. And in fact, I think as I look at the political situation and the terrible divide in our country right now, we could resolve a lot of this animosity toward each other just by starting with that simple principle of being kind to each other. I'm giving a speech today to the one of the local Rotary clubs here in Jacksonville. And one of the things I'm going to tell them, and I'm going to use this as an illustration, is that when I put the address of the hotel where they meet, and I put it into my GPS, it came up with two alternative routes. And I had to choose which route I wanted. One was a little faster, one was a little slower, but both routes ultimately would have gotten me to that Rotary Club meeting. And I think if we could recognize that Democrats and Republicans are all trying to get to the same place, and that is to make a better America, to make a stronger America, and to meet the deep desires and wishes and needs of the American people. They have different routes for getting there. Politics is about method, and the Democrats tend to be more, shall we say, social and I don't mean socialist, but right. I mean in that it's more a group approach to solving problems. We need to do this as a group, as a society, as a government. Republicans have traditionally, and conservatives have emphasized the individual part of this equation. Well, the fact is it takes both. It does take a village to do some of these things, but it also takes individual entrepreneurship. And so I think if we could recognize that the divisions in our country are not so much about our goals. I think as Americans, we share many of the same goals. We would like clean air and clean water and good jobs and good education for our children. We're in agreement on where we want to go, but the disagreement is in how we get there. And I don't know when it happened that this difference in method suddenly made us enemies. And if you have a different way of wanting to achieve these goals, you don't just have a different method or a different means of getting there. You're my enemy. We don't even share the goals anymore. And I think that's tragic. And I think somehow we've got to use kindness and understanding and putting ourselves in the other person's shoes to get back to a time when we could debate vigorously the method without demonizing or becoming enemies.
I think about the press releases and things that I get from parties and such over the last few years. And it is to my chagrin that so often there is not a single thing about an issue or an idea there. It is, this named politician did this terrible thing. It's all in the personal and in the individual. And I keep thinking back every time I read one of these to what Eleanor Roosevelt would say, which is, great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. And I wonder if so much has become sensationalist, not just, you got social media, you have, and you mentioned this in the book, kind of a march towards sensationalism among some news outlets. Like, I know that there is this draw towards the personalities, but we also need to have some meat with the potatoes, that we're actually talking about what's going on and what affects people in an everyday life.
Well, the current stories about Facebook and how they have sacrificed their integrity in many instances for profit has really underscored what's going on, not just on Facebook, but in television media, in the news channels. They have discovered that controversy and anger sell. If they can get people stirred up, if they can make them angry, if they can throw them into the midst of controversy, that means more eyeballs are going to be watching, more people are going to be reading, more people are going to be going to those websites. And the more people they get watching, the more eyeballs they get on those things, the more advertising they sell, because, as you know, advertising is sold by the numbers. How many people are watching? How many people are reading? How many people are listening? And it's tragic that has now become the dominant motivation for so much media. It's when I was in, and boy, I'm 86 years old, so I am an old fogey, and I guess it's all right if I harken back to the good old days. A lot about them weren't good. But the one thing that was good about the years that I was in television is that I think there was a strong commitment on the part of most of us in the business, and this is local and national, to find the facts and tell the truth. Now, yes, there was some bias, and all of us have our own biases and our own predilections toward certain political parties and philosophies. We have all that. But for the most part, most of us, most of the time, were able to rise above that and be professional and tell the truth as we understood it. And I just don't see as much of that today. You've got some of it, and you've certainly got some good journalists out there who are trying, despite the systems that they're having to work in. But when I talk to journalism classes these days, I tell the kids, no matter what else you do, no matter what else you learn, keep at the forefront of your mind that your job, your primary mission in life, is to tell the truth.
To me, I think that's so crucial, even among partisans, because if we can have some shared truth in these situations and work off the same, if we can all sing off the same sheet, then it's something where an alto and a soprano and all these other things can fit in. What I worry about, especially in the last, maybe 10 years more, where the sheet music is just everyone's got different music and you can't seem to bring it back together. And it just seems to be spinning up more and more. And I don't think that's good for democracy.
Back when Walter Cronkite was being consistently regarded as the most trusted man in America, I don't think there was as much disagreement about facts. You would have some people who would support the Vietnam War and some people who would oppose the Vietnam War. But I don't think there was too much disagreement over the facts concerning the Vietnam War. Now, there were some facts that were hidden from us. We know now that the government was covering up a lot. We weren't getting the straight truth. McNamara, in his revelatory book, told us just how much the government was misleading us on Vietnam. But when we watched the news, whether it was Huntley and Brinkley on NBC or Harry Reasoner on ABC or Walter Cronkite on CBS, I don't think there was as much disagreement then as there is today over the facts. People would take the facts and then they would look at them and analyze them and come to their own conclusions, and they wouldn't all come to the same conclusion, to be sure. But today, we can't even agree on what's true. We can't even agree on facts. There's your truth, there's my truth, there's MSNBC's truth, there's Fox News truth. And until we can get back to a point where we can at least have, as you said, people singing from the same sheet music, we've got to be able to agree on basically what is true. We can't even get people to agree on whether the election was stolen or not. And so this is a real danger to our country. It's a real threat to our democracy.
I think about this too as an expression of identity. You know, I've talked to a number of people who who say they do not believe that the election was fair and all that other stuff, and they say, but this is who I am. And it's almost as if like the false fact is almost like a signifier to other people. I am in your in group, which is a really weird place to be in.
Well, there's no doubt that the divisions in our country really revolve around tribe. And, you know, this is one of the things that, going back to my religious heritage, when I grew up, there were certain things that you simply had to believe and you had to profess in order to be a part of your group. And you had to live a certain way, you had to talk a certain way, you had to believe certain things. And one of the reasons I left my pursuit of the ministry was because when I got up in the pulpit, I wasn't expected to lead people on an objective journey for truth, capital T. I was expected to reinforce the things that all of us already believed. And that, to me, was just not satisfactory. Now, there are a lot of ministers today in a lot of different churches and denominations who are a lot freer to seek objective truth than I was in my church, in my situation, in that very conservative evangelical environment at that time. But I felt that going into journalism was a place where I could seek absolute truth, unfettered, without any obligation to have to accept ideas and concepts and theologies that may or may not make sense to me.
Thing I think about when I think about your name is trust. And one of the things I see that's a lack in this whole situation is a lack of trust with a lot of people. What could some folks that are in the media, how can we help to build trust, do you think?
Well, I think one of the things we need to learn to do is to be less confrontational and to listen more and maybe speak less as members of the media. There is a widespread perception that the media is not fair. I think we are trusted as a group, perhaps less than the proverbial used car salesman. We're right down there in public confidence with members of Congress, and that's pretty low. I think the antidote to that is for us to try to understand why people think what they think and believe what they believe. And when we see people or groups of people or these tribes of people that we know are clinging to things that are not true, I think instead of just confronting them and challenging them and saying, you're wrong, we need to listen and try to understand and figure out why they believe these things, why they are so misled. And I think that needs to be an important part of our work, in addition to just telling the truth and trying to get the facts out there. Because if people don't believe us, if they don't, telling the truth isn't going to get through. It isn't going to register with them. So I think there needs to be, on the part of media, some humility, some recognition that we have brought some of these problems on ourselves, and the willingness to listen and learn from the people that we are serving, the audience, the readers, the listeners, the viewers.
You know, you spent a lot of years here in Detroit, and I gotta ask for people because, we're daily Detroit and our audience loves this town. What is it about here that you decided after all these places? And I encourage people to read the book. It's at mortcrimspeaks.com. You can get a signed copy for yourself. Why Detroit? Like, what is it about here that you said, I'm going to stay here?
It's interesting. Of course, I eventually was let go by CBS in Chicago because the situation between Bill Curtis and me, once he made the determination that he was staying, and of course he'd been on the air there for 6 years, he had a track record. I was new to town. So when they had to make the choice between Bill and me, it was an obvious and logical choice. So I was a free agent, as they say in sports. And I was looking around at several opportunities. I had an opportunity to go to the CBS station on the West Coast. I had an invitation to go to WCBS in New York. And I'm looking at all these places, and then I get the invitation to come to Detroit. And my first response was, why should I go to Detroit? And in a discussion with Jim Snyder, who was the vice president of news for all of the post-Newsweek television stations, and they had just acquired WDIV. And Jim, after a lengthy discussion about Detroit and the opportunities, he asked me, he said, "How old are you?" And I said, "I'm 44. And I think I was 44 at the time, maybe 43. But he said, "Well, you've got about half of your career still ahead of you." And he said, "There would be a lot worse ways to spend the second half of your life than helping an old beat-up city find its way back." Well, as Jim walked out of the hotel room door and shut the door behind him, my wife turned to me and said, "We're going to Detroit, aren't we?" And she knew that he had touched a nerve with that statement, because I guess even though I left the ministry, I never got over being something of a missionary. And that challenge to not just go to L.A. and I felt the news out there had pretty much crossed the line into entertainment at that time anyway. A lot of stations followed suit after that. But not just to give the news, but to give the news in a context and in a city that was hurting and that was financially in trouble, and the race relations were in trouble, and there was a lot of rebuilding and a lot of work that needed to be done in this once great city, and I would say now becoming once again a great city, of Detroit. So the challenge was incredible. We took it on. I hope that during my time on the air, I was able to make some little bit of difference in the lives of some people by giving them good information and the kinds of things that we have to have in a democracy in order to make good decisions. And I hope I was able, through my second thoughts commentaries, to inspire some people and maybe help a little bit in that area. But that was the reason I came to Detroit. It was with a mission and with a purpose. And I never regretted for one moment that decision. Detroit is still and will always be home for us. And we love the city, and we take such great pride in the progress and the things that are happening and have happened over the last several years and will happen in the next.
Mort Crim, thank you. I'll put a link to Mort Crim Speaks in the show notes. Make sure that you get a copy of this book, and I appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you so much, Jer.
There's some good news as I record this. Journalist Danny Fenster is on his way home. The Huntington Woods native had been spending most of this year in a prison in the Southeast Asian country of Myanmar. Fenster had been sentenced last week to 11 years of hard labor on charges of spreading false information and working with illegal organizations. He was the managing editor at the magazine Frontier Myanmar amid a government crackdown on free speech and democracy. His release comes after negotiations between the military rulers and a former U.S. diplomat, Bill Richardson. The work was delicate as the U.S. did not want to officially recognize the current Myanmar government, and officials there didn't want to look weak bowing to the pressure of foreigners. However, it got done. Welcome home, Danny. To the relief of drivers, work on I-75 in Oakland County is stopping for the winter. MDOT will not get back to it again until the construction season revs back up in February of 2022. This means 3 lanes in each direction, and the ramps between 8 Mile Road and Square Lake Roads have reopened. Some of the work completed this year includes a rebuild of the southbound travel lanes and ramps between 8 Mile and I-696, 3 pedestrian bridges, rebuilding and reopening of the 11 Mile and southbound 75 bridge over 13 Mile, and 2 new interchanges at 14 Mile and also at Big Beaver. Work on the service drives will continue through the winter months. In 2022, the focus will shift to the northbound lanes and ramps of I-75 from I-696 to about 13 Mile Road. That music means we are done for today. If you haven't already, be sure to follow Daily Detroit on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you download shows. Also, signed copies of Mort Crim's book are available at mortcrimspeaks.com. You can also listen to his dulcet tones on Audible if physical copies aren't your thing. With that, I'm Jer Stays. Thanks for listening, take care of each other, and I'll see you around Detroit.